only your word heard, through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Please be seated. Now I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you be in agreement, and that there be no division among you, but that you be united in the same mind and the same purpose. I had cataract surgery last spring, so I'm into the glasses on, glasses off thing, but I can see better now with my surgically enhanced 20/20 vision. I think all of us can agree that St. Paul was a very strong-willed person. Whatever he did fully and completely. When something that came up that was important to him, he was all in. We saw this back in the days when he was Saul, and when he saw himself as one of the principal defenders of Judaism. We saw that tragic story where the mob stoned St. Stephen, the first Christian martyr, to death. And Paul stood by and watched and gave his approval to what had happened. And when you look at the early Saul, as he was known in those days, it's clear that he felt that he had a unique and particular mission, and that he would have continued that throughout his life had he not made that fateful trip that ended up with him being transformed. You may remember that story. It's a very dramatic one about his being struck blind on the road. And when his vision came back, he saw himself and his calling and the whole world in a different way. And Saul, now Paul, becomes one of the great defenders of the Christian faith that he had previously tried to wipe out. It's a remarkable story, one of true and genuine transformation, where Paul took the same energy that he had used in order to try to eliminate all religions that threatened Judaism and dedicated it to upholding and supporting Christianity. Everywhere he went, he started a new congregation. And we're blessed because a lot of his letters to those congregations survived, including the one that we heard today. It's very clear that although Paul rarely went back to the congregations that he'd founded, that he had very strong opinions about who they were and how they should function as a congregation. And as we heard today, the word had reached him that there was a lot of dissension in the parish at Corinth, and that it was around personalities. Isn't that always true in the church? And so we heard him cite the 4 different divisions that he had heard about in the Corinthian church. There were those people who identified themselves as being followers of Paul because he had founded the congregation and he was the one that they identified with as being kind of at the center of that congregation. And then there were those who had been baptized by and been moved by the brilliant and eloquent preacher Apollos, who was the one who followed Paul and was currently their pastor. Another group liked Cephas, another name for Peter, who was Paul's greatest antagonist and one of the major leaders of the early church. And then there was a 4th group that Paul identified, and it seems odd that he would bring this up. He said, there are those of you who organize your lives around Christ. Why is that bad? But apparently they did it in a very exclusive way, like we're part of the in crowd and all the rest of you are out. And so Paul didn't like what they had done with Jesus. It's very clear that he did not like or appreciate all these cliques that had grown up in the church. As we heard today, he spoke out very strongly against them as he tried to encourage this congregation to regroup and to become what he had originally envisioned for them to be. As we heard in that opening statement, the thing that was most important to Paul in the church was unity. That people should be focused around doing those things which drew together and unified the congregation, and to avoid those things that separated and divided them. It was for that reason Paul said, I don't want to be remembered because of the people that I baptized. No matter how important that might have been, what I would like you to remember me by is how effectively I proclaimed the gospel. And that should be the model for all of you as well. The focus should not be on personalities, on subgroups, on the in-group and the out-group. It should be on how we can, in unity, together proclaim the gospel. That was his clear message to them. We don't know exactly how they took that, but nonetheless, he wanted to be clear about the fact that the thing that they should focus on in their community life were those things that encouraged unity among them. When I was a brand new priest back in 1970, which seems a very long time ago now, because it is. Oh, you're shaking your head. It's not that long. My first church job was St. Paul's Church in Charlottesville, Virginia. And it was a very interesting congregation because not only being a large multi-clergy congregation, it also was the Episcopal chaplaincy for the University of Virginia. Thomas Jefferson felt very strongly that no church should intrude on the campus, so all the ministries to the students were covered by congregations that were on the periphery. And this was a very interesting congregation because about half of it were university people, faculty and staff and students, and all of them were very, very liberal. And the other half of the congregation were people from what we used to call the first families of Virginia. Those old conservative Virginia families that have been members of this congregation since its founding. And so as you can imagine, it was a real balancing act for us as clergy to try to keep these two groups together. And what made it extremely difficult, if you're old enough to recall all of this, was that that was at the height of the Vietnam War. And there was a significant group within the congregation. Here I'm a 22-year-old priest. I was a little older, a 23-year-old priest, just starting out. Been there maybe 3 or 4 months when there was this strong movement that the congregation should pass a resolution opposing the war in Vietnam. And it became quite a divisive issue within the congregation because, as you heard the description of the congregation, about half the people thought this was a terrific idea. The other half thought that it was terrible and that it was unpatriotic not to support the administration and the war effort. And so we had a series of really strong, very emotional meetings where we tried to figure out how we could craft a resolution that reflected the will of the congregation. And what became clear over time was that there was no way that we could reconcile these two different groups. And so what the congregation finally opted to do was to put unity above consensus. And they finally decided not to try to do a congregation-wide resolution because there was no way they could do something that was reflective of the feelings of the whole congregation. And I remember this vividly. It was a phrase that I've never forgotten. We decided that we would disagree in love. And that became kind of the watchword for the congregation. And in many ways, we were much more unified and stronger after this struggle than we had been before. I don't know that there are a lot of opportunities that are as graphic as this for how congregations can grapple with their sense of mission and their desire for unity within the congregation. But when those opportunities occur, I think it's requisite upon us to do whatever we can to try to work on unifying our community and proclaiming the gospel in love. One of the opportunities I think we have on an annual basis to deal with these kinds of issues, you may not think this, but it's certainly true, is the annual meeting of the parish. Because the annual meeting is the opportunity where we come together, where all of you come together, to reflect on where this congregation has been in the last year, to think about what your vision is for the direction the church ought to go, and to commit to doing this in unity. To me, it seems that it's very important, particularly as you're beginning the search for a new rector, that you think about who you are, what you are about, and how you together can proclaim the gospel in love. In case you had forgotten, there is a meeting right after this service. I'm hoping that all of you will stay and engage in that conversation, not just about the nuts and the bolts and the treasurer's report, but who are we and where we are headed. And if you do that, St. Paul will be very proud. Amen.